This session, I am going to share you some instructional practices that make up like a little mini routine. And we're going to work our way through 3 of them. Topic webs, 2-column notes, summarizing. And I want you to see how they begin to connect to one another. What you have up here is a graphic that shows a collection of teacher routine instructional practices and then strategies for kids to use. So in the middle, we have 4 research-based strategies. We know the national, thank you so much, the National Reading Panel identified what are some of the comprehension strategies that are most effective, and all of that is kind of represented in here. But those 4 items are things that ultimately we want students to be able to use and have themselves, almost like a set of tools in their pocket, right? How many of you are familiar with gradual release, I, we, you? So all of these, though, have to start with the teacher teaching the kids, then lots of guided practice, modeling, kids working with one another. That's where scaffolds come in. I'm going to show you a bunch of scaffolds. Ultimately, though, we want the kids to get to the independent use stage where they know how to take notes themselves. They know how to summarize verbally and orally. They know how to use a topic web to give themselves a big picture, okay? And that they know how to generate questions about what they're learning. Around the outside, these are more instructional skills that teachers need to be aware of. So teaching kids using IWU, right? Teaching kids fundamental main idea skills. Teaching kids about text structure. But we only have an hour and a half. Normally it would take me 2 days to cover all this. So I decided to focus on the 3 strategies for students right in the middle. The other thing is, I'm going to talk about instructional practices around this, but what I find is, especially when we have a short amount of time, if I just give you lots of classroom examples, you're going to be able to figure out how you can use this yourself. So that's the plan. I will refer to, at numerous times, various resources, templates, and I will say to you, they're available on the website. So I've got this right up front on the first slide. The worksheets, templates are up there. You just go to the Keys to Literacy website, resources, and it's all there. I've got free videos, free articles, like 40 years of my life's work is there for people to download free. Free YouTube videos, and I've been writing a blog for about 2.5, 3 years now. Every couple of weeks I post with links to all kinds of resources, so please take advantage of it. Let's begin with top-down topic webs. What are they? It's a graphic organizer, right? And we all know that graphic organizers help students. The problem is there are too many graphic organizers, right? So Google graphic organizers, you get hundreds of them, right? And you know what I found a long time ago, I didn't say anything about myself. So my background, I started in education too long ago, 1975, and I had the honor and privilege to work at the Landmark School, which is in Massachusetts, for 23 years. It was wonderful, and it was also wonderful because my son, who's ADHD and LD, got to go there some summers, and it was wonderful. And that's where everything I learned was during that time there. And it really influenced my approach to teaching. I just thought everybody taught in a multisensory way, that you were explicit, you know. And then I started doing some training and consulting through the outreach program at Landmark in the public schools, and I began to realize, ooh, boy, no, I shouldn't take this for granted. So that's my experience. And I also am the mother of a child who has learning issues, except he's not a child, he's 26. Just got home this year from being in the Army for 6 years, and for those of you who have ADHD children and you think, are they ever going to settle down? They don't settle down, but it's great to have that when you're in the Army. You can stay up all night and do all the things you need to do. So, all right. So what I found in working with my students over all those years is that there's lots of strategies. Anybody ever read Stephanie Harvey's Strategies That Work? You know, it's like she's got like 45 strategies. The same thing with graphic organizers. And what are we trying to do for these kids? We're trying to give them a small set of skills that they can use over and over again. And they need practice in those over and over again in every subject, in every grade, for them to master them. If every week if I'm a sixth grader and I have 5 teachers, right? If I go in your class and you use these 2 graphic organizers, and then I go in yours and you use 2 more and you use 3 more, and it becomes overwhelming. Now, I'm not saying that other graphic organizers are not good. They are. So, for example, what do you use this one for? Overlapping bins. Compare and contrast, and nothing beats it. But is most of what we learn and read about compare and contrast? It's very specific. So as you'll see when I start showing you the classroom examples, I landed on this topic web many years ago because it's flexible. It serves as a good default topic graphic organizer. So I'm not saying this is the only one there is, but what I'm saying is if you've got several teachers working with the same student and they all begin to use this as the default, the students get to the point where they learn it faster. So what do I mean by top-down, top-web? Well, the higher you are, the broader the topic, okay? So we could even do a top-down web of this dyslexia conference, right? What's up on the top? You know, the annual dyslexia conference. We might think about strands. There's strands for parents, right? There's strands for teachers. There's strands for special ed teachers. And then within that, we can start to build. Also, I want you to notice what I'm doing. I'm Italian, so this comes naturally to me. But do you notice how I'm building it in the air? And that is because what I'm doing is trying to visually show you how I'm organizing these concepts in my head. And that's what the topic web does. So the higher you are, the broader the topic. All right, next, you change shapes as you move to different sub-levels. So you'll notice the first one is a big rectangle. The next level down are ovals. The next level down, we go back to boxes. Doesn't matter what the shapes are, right? What matters is that you change from one to the next to have it pop out at you. The purpose of it, where's my little clicker? Oh, there it is. Thank you. Okay. The purpose of a top-down web is to give a big picture of something. By the way, what I'm sharing with you today, when people hear comprehension, they think it means reading. This can be applied to a whole lot more than reading. We like to say that these strategies can be used with anything that's read, said, or done. Not only in school and in the classroom, but even in your home life. It shows things in a hierarchical way. It gives kids the big picture, a roadmap. Why teach it? Well, we know that graphic organizers are essential. The other thing that it does is it helps kids develop a schema. Does anybody feel comfortable? I know it's a large group. Sharing what you think the word schema means. What's a schema? Anybody? Yes. It's what you know. So what you know goes into a schema. Yep. Anybody want to add to that? That's one thing you might build your schema on, connecting to an author. Yes? Yes. Here's the simple definition, right? It's a mental map. It's a mental image of how you connect the information you know. And we're always adding to our schema. So think about little kids who love dinosaurs, right? They first start learning about dinosaurs, and they have a few concepts and a few words about it. But the more their parents read aloud about dinosaurs, the more they watch videos about dinosaurs, what happens? Their schema grows, and the schema represents how they make connections. Well, I always felt that the kids I worked with who struggled, it didn't come naturally for them to make connections. You know, some kids are disorganized and you can see it on the outside, right? Their socks don't match, they're losing things. But some kids, that also happens in here. And so when they're learning about dinosaurs, they've got all this information, all these words, but it's hard for them to make connections. And the same thing happens with everything we need to learn in school. So what a schema does is it organizes that information. What the top-down web does is it turns it into a visual of that. The other thing that you're going to find happens is when you start creating topic webs for what you're teaching, or let's say the students are about to read an article and you generate a topic web of that, it is going to organize you as the teacher. Because we think we know what we want kids to learn, right? And we think we've got it organized in our heads, but it's like a secret that we don't share with the kids. And when you have to start to put it down on paper to say, here's the roadmap. It's like before you plan a trip, If you kind of know where you're going, you just, I know where I'm going. But I remember my son Jay in the car, he'd always be like, Mom, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Like, how far are we? And I got to making these little maps for him so that he would feel comfortable and know where we were going and at various points be able to check in. So that's what it does. It helps you as well organize yourself. Let me share a little comparison between a top-down web and another very common graphic organizer. Some people call this a spider web or a brainstorm or a semantic map. It's excellent. Like, you throw an idea out in the middle, everybody brainstorms. But if you had to use one of these to say to students, here's what we're going to be studying in the next week, or here's what we're going to be reading about, or if you said, use this to help you study for a test or a quiz, which one visually makes it easier to see the schema for the information? Okay? I also want to talk some of the technical about this. Let's take a look on the left side. And here you have the exact same top-down web, right? The only difference is we've not changed shapes up there. Do you see how this one lets you pop out that this is these are subordinate to this, and this is subordinate to this? I also want to share about the power of color. Now, when we're photocopying things for kids, we can't use color a lot, but when there is an opportunity to use it, it really reinforces as well. So in this case, you can see that, let's say we were talking about 2 causes of the Civil War. So over here, we've got the first cause and the subtopics under it. They're all in the same color. It makes them pop out, right? Another way you could do it, though, is if you want to focus on these big ideas, then you make them the same color and the subordinate is a different color. I also want you to think about arrows and positioning. It's all very thoughtful. This is not artistic, right? It's there for a purpose. Also, this is just a little kind of trick of the trade. When you're developing a web and you've got a lot of subordinate topics, sometimes you can stack them like this. But what lets you know that these are subordinate to that? The shape changes, and we have an arrow saying this leads to this. By the way, why do you think we didn't put an arrow from this to this and this to this? Because that would mean first, second, third, and that might not be the case. All right. What I'm going to do is show you a bunch of examples now of things that have been read, said, or done. I'm going to start with things that haven't even been read. So what do I mean by said or done? Things that we might listen to. So you're listening to a class discussion or a debate. You're watching a video. Maybe you're doing a science experiment, or you're on a class trip. So I'll show you a bunch of those, and then I'll show you some text examples. Here's one. This was an 8th grade class, and they used the top-down web to organize their trip to Washington, D.C. And you can see that these were the 3, here we go. These are the 3 major areas that they were going to go, and then these were the sites they were going to see underneath each one. I'm going to go through these quickly, and afterwards, if anybody wants me to go back and look at a few more, I can do that. But I find the more I can squeeze in, the better it's going to be for you. Here's one. This is a good example of what I call a reusable topic web. So you might have something that is not just temporary for that week or that day, but something you can keep referring to. And I like to show this one because you can see the power of how when the teacher added color. So this one is how to complete a research assignment. And you got the 4 major topics, right? And then the sub things underneath. This one is how to solve a math problem. This also serves as a good reusable. You're also going to be able to see here how you can use this in any subject in any grade level. So here, again, we've got the major steps in the problem-solving process and then the sub-steps. Here's one for reading strategies. Teacher's got a variety of strategies and then is reminding kids some of the sub-steps for it. This is one. This is from a vocational ed high school. We train teachers like in every kind of school imaginable. And this one teacher, she's a cosmetology teacher, she just went to like one training like this and started using it with her kids. And what I find often with the voc ed teachers is many of the kids they work with struggle with language and with reading and writing, but the teachers themselves, they're thinking about their content, and it just settles in much more easily for them. So here's just one example of many how the teacher used this. So hair coloring, I learned a lot by this, right? There's temporary, semi-permanent, demi-permanent, and permanent. So anyway, that's a Voc example. Here's another math one about fractions. So this represented a whole unit of study that the kids were learning, estimating, adding and subtracting, mixed numbers, multiplying, dividing, and then under that you have some subcategories. So this is a web that could last for a whole month in the classroom. This is one that is linked to a textbook. No, I'm sorry, not to a textbook, but to topics within, even though they were using a textbook. So you've got Civil War, antecedents, events before, important battles, important figures, African Americans, and minorities. Here's one. This is a real good example of a reusable. How many of you teach literature, right? And what is it that we want the kids to learn starting in second grade, right? What are the basic elements of a story? Characters, setting, plot. So this is the kind of thing that you could put up as a bulletin board, right? And then as you go through different pieces of narrative that you read, you still keep this here, but you end up substituting the actual information for a particular story. This is one, this teacher used it just to organize all the characters in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, are some of you asking, what did they use to create this? So let me take a pause and say, how do you make these things? Obviously, you can draw some by hand, right? You saw a few of those. Anybody recognize any technology going on here? Yes?
Inspiration.
Inspiration or Kidspiration. That's my go-to. I've been using it for years. But, you know, this you could be using drawing tools in Word or in Microsoft PowerPoint, right? There are all kinds of mapping software out there. It's constantly changing. If you just Google mapping software, different things are going to come up. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's not. But remind yourselves as teachers and the students, this is not art. You're not being judged on how nicely you draw. So just grab a piece of paper and a pencil, and that's good enough. You don't have to have the technology. Here's another one that's related to narrative text, but it's not tied directly to the reading. This teacher, instead of focusing on characters, was focusing on character and conflict. So right up front, teachers got the three main characters and the different types of conflict that set up. Can anybody see how this could follow you through the whole novel and how the students could be finding examples of, so what was the conflict between Kit and the Puritans and Kit and Matthew Wood? This is one of a whole booklet. National Geographic has these really cool series, and they have like a topic, in this case learning about blood, the blood system, and then they have like multiple versions of it at different grade levels. The pictures are the same, the content is the same, so if you have kids at different levels of decoding, they can still participate in a science class. So this teacher developed this topic web to let the students know what were the big topics they were going to learn about blood, which are these four, and then within that, what were they going to learn? So under blood and disease, they were going to learn about sickle cell anemia and HIV. Now, when you get actually into the reading, there's a whole lot more information about those topics, but it gives you the big picture. By the way, these are great tools before, during, and after. Before, you use them to activate prior knowledge, to find out what the kids already know. You can use it as a basis to have kids generate questions or make predictions. So for example, is there something you see on here that you know something about? Jot it down, turn to a partner, share what that is. Let's share it out together. Now I'd like everybody to write a question or make a prediction of something you think we're going to learn. So that's some of the before. In the during, you use it to kind of make connections, especially if that web represents a week or 2 weeks worth of stuff. You get really lost in the details sometimes in one day. Maybe you're doing an experiment or you're reading something, and you lose sight of the big picture. So you make connections. And then finally, as an after strategy, it can be used for students to generate a summary. They can create questions off of it. They can use it as a study tool. So you can use it before, during, and after. This is one it's a web that represents an entire chapter in a social studies, a history textbook about the Constitutional Convention. When kids are doing this from textbooks, it's often easier because they have all those wonderful headings, right? And subheadings that kind of make it already pop out for them. Here, this student is at the obviously you do it stage. He's created a topic web for his section of the social studies book. This is another math. So this represents the whole chapter in a math chapter about displaying data. All right. I also wanted to bring in some of the lower grades for you to see. Originally, I started this work with students in grades 4 and up. My focus when I worked at Landmark many years ago and started teaching there was the older kids, getting them ready for college. And in fact, a good part of what I'm sharing with you here made up the core instructional practice set that we used when we launched Landmark College. But you can bring this down into the earliest grades. We do this now with kindergarten to grade 3. Obviously, the focus is you use a lot more of oral language, right? And oftentimes what goes in the webs or the notes are pictures rather than words, because the kids can't write the words yet in kindergarten and first. But it doesn't mean kids have to have complete decoding in place before you work on comprehension. We have to be working on the comprehension all along. So here you have an example of a top-down web that's reflecting the various settings in the story, The Gingerbread Man. This is a grade 2. It was a little story they were reading, and the teacher gave the students training to be an astronaut, during liftoff, after liftoff, and you can see that the students have space to jot in a couple of key words about the subtopics. This is a great one if you want to look at learning spelling. We've got float, F-L-O-T-E, and then we've got float, F-L-O-W-T. But she's got good phonemic awareness, right? Okay. So, was it helpful to see a bunch of examples? If the fire alarm went off right now, you would leave and you'd still be able to use one of these, right? But I want us to do a little practice and think about it before I move to the next topic. So, what we're going to do is practice using the sleeping and napping article that I had. So let's turn to the very first page in your packouts. Did everybody get one? Were there enough? And there's no more left over there? Okay, I'm sorry. These are online. So for this little piece, look over the shoulder of somebody that's got one, okay? They told me there were 80. I made 85. So first, before we jump into the topic web about this, I do want to say a little word about the power and the value of annotating text as a scaffold for students. I could spend a whole 2 hours just on this, but I thought I would just quickly give you a sense of how it works by modeling it for you. So let's take a look at this article, and you haven't even read it yet. What are some of the annotated clues that I've given? I've let you know, here's an introduction. Why would I do that? Why would I make that stand out? Because if we're teaching kids how introductions work, right, which we have to teach them both for the clues they get when they read something, but also when they have to write, they've got to write introductions, right? So if I point out, guess what, there is an introduction, and I've taught my kids what introductions do, which is let you know what you're going to be reading about. Now this pops out, and they can say, if I just read these first few sentences, I'm going to know what this is all about. What else did I do to annotate? Main ideas. I made them really stand out for them. Now, in this case, it turns out that the main ideas were stated, and most of the times they were stated at the very first sentence. Lucky for us, because in reality, that doesn't always happen. We teach kids that when you write a paragraph, you start with a topic sentence, and it's going to tell you what it's about. But in reality, many of the topics of the paragraphs we read in real life, it's not stated, or it is stated somewhere in the middle or at the end. Implied main ideas are really hard for kids. So if you can scaffold for the kids who need it by either pointing out where the main idea is, I underlined it, right? Or another scaffold that isn't as intense, you can put over on the side, instead of writing main idea, you can write B for it's in the beginning, M, it's somewhere in the middle, E, it's at the end, or I, it's implied. You're not going to be able to find it. You have to figure it out yourself. So this is really important for kids because we want them to see the forest through the trees, right? When we start talking about 2-column notes in a little bit, you need to know what the difference is between the relevant details and the big ideas. So we can give them some guidance about that. What else did I annotate here? Yeah, what are the circled things? What are those things? They're transition words and phrases. I have a poster up here. Did I give you a copy of this in your handouts towards the end? Yes? I did? Okay, good. Even if I didn't, yep, there it is, page 6. So you've got I've been using this same list for 40 years, okay? And when my first students moved on to college and moved on to real life, they would write me letters and say, can I have another copy? And then it moved into email, and now I'm so old that all my students are in their 40s and 50s and they don't write me anymore, okay? But worth its weight in gold, okay? Because this is about language, right? Our kids struggle with language. These words, each one of them gives clues. It's clues when you're reading. It's if you use them in your writing, you're allowing the other person who's reading your work to understand it, and our kids do not know these words. One of the most exciting moments in my life when I was dealing with my son in high school, you know, back to school night, right? You go and you spend 15 minutes in every class. So I walked into his science teacher, and behind his desk he had this big poster of transitions. It was handwritten, but it was a poster, right? And at the end, I went up to him, and he had no idea what I did for a living because my family has a different name. And I said, what's that? And he said, oh, those are transition words. They're really important when they write. And, you know, I'm having the students write much more than we ever did in science before. And did you know your son has a hard time writing? Did you know that? I'm like, oh, sure, yeah, I know that. Think about how many IEP meetings I went to, right? And he said, you know, you might want to have a copy of this over his desk at home. And I was smiling the whole way out. It's like, this is what we want. Imagine this, a high school science teacher being aware of that scaffold for students. So let's take a look at some of the circles. And just, can you find one that if the student was aware of that transition, it would help them make meaning? Anybody see an example? As a result, examples include, but, however. How many of your kids don't know what however means? Yeah, okay. So we can scaffold by making the transitions. What else did I do? Look at the boxes and stars. I'm making the text features that are provided apparent to the kids. Our kids just blow by. Things like headings and bold print, right, and italic and numbers, those are like a little guy in the road. I once was doing some training in Colorado and was driving through the mountains, and they have on these really curvy spaces, they don't just have a sign. They've got a guy there going like this, like slow down, you know, curve. And that, it hit me, like that's what these clues are. It's like a guy saying, slow down, we're gonna give you a clue here, we're gonna change the topic. And our kids just blow right by all of it. So that's about all I have time to share about text annotation as a scaffold. But I want you to think about how you can do this at lots of different levels. So if I've got 25 kids in my classroom, I might give some of them no annotations. I may give some of them main ideas, you know, this group. I might give some of them all of this. I would also maybe take a few moments and take the first part and work it through them and do the annotations together. What do we think is the main idea? Do you see any transitions that you can circle? Okay? All right, so I'm going to go back now to the regularly scheduled show. What I'd like you to do now, I know you don't have time to read the whole article, but since we were just working on topic webs, let's turn to the first page after, which is page 3. And you'll see that I have already created a partially completed topic web for the article. Everybody see it? Go back. How many headings were in the article? There were 4. So what do you notice? 4 circles or 4 ovals, right? And then within each section, there were a couple of main ideas, 2 or 3 for each one. So I've partially completed this. I know we don't have time to do it completely, but what I would like you to do, you can work alone or you can work with a partner. I want you to go back to the article and just start with what belongs in this circle and pick at least one of the other squares, go into the text to figure out what you might put in one of these others. So I'm only going to give you a couple minutes. Let's see how far you can get. Okay, may I welcome you back? Because I can see that you've filled in at least one or two. Let's just debrief that a second. What did you do? How did you go about figuring this out? Anybody? Yes?
I went back and looked at headings and first the text.
Yes. So the heading part, that was pretty easy. I gave you 3. There were only 4. That was a pretty obvious one. But for the ones in the boxes, you had to go back into the text, right? Now, in the text, I had already given you some clues by underlining the main ideas, right? And that's really what you want. You don't want to grab a little detail. You want the main idea to go in the box, okay? So you literally unpack a piece of text. That's all text is it's structure. Somebody built something. I always like to use with kids Legos as an example. So let's say, you know the smallest piece of Lego? It's like, it usually has like 2 dots. By the way, you could even do this as it relates to word building, you know, within a word, but I'm going to start at the word level. So let's say every one of those little blocks is a word. How do we make a sentence? Yeah, you get like 5 or 10, however long the sentence is, words. You stick them together and you have a sentence. Now, you have to be very careful. You can't just randomly put them in an order because we have rules of grammar, syntax, right? But now I've got a sentence. Everybody see it? Okay. How do I make a paragraph? Yeah, I take maybe 3 or 4 of those sentences, put them together, but I need to hold them, right? So what do? I put one of those things across the top that holds them. That's your main idea. And if I'm going to have a conclusion within the same paragraph, I might put another one like underneath as a base. How do I build a 4 or 5 paragraph article? Yeah, take a big base, right? Take 4 or 5 of those big chunks. Some of them might be bigger than others, depending on how many little words we got in there. We put them all together, and then we put another big one over it. That's like the central idea. Everybody see where this is going? Right? And then if you want, you can build a house, you could build an apartment building, you can, and when kids look at volumes of text, if they know that it all starts with those little Legos, right? And they can begin to unpack, it then helps them when they have to write themselves, okay? So, let's do a little bit more on topic webs, and then we'll move to column notes. So here's a good question. How detailed should a topic web get? How much should you put on the page? Anybody have a thought about that? Yeah.
Not a lot.
Yeah, because then it gets really overwhelming. Think about all the examples I showed you. Some had more detail than others. But if you start trying to make that represent everything, it loses its purpose, right? So what do you do when you've got a lot more detail? You have 2 options. One is to switch to 2 column notes. And I'll show you how that works. Basically, any part of your web, the main part, a piece of the web, moves into the left side of our 2 column notes, which is where the big ideas go, and then you can add lots of details on the right. But another thing that you can do is break out into subwebs. So it's best for me to just show you an example. All right, this is a pretty complicated web already, right? This was from a high school. They were learning about electromagnets and induction. Now, the print is small, so I'm going to read it out to you. There are 3 big topics: electric and magnetism, electric motors, generators, and transformers. Everybody see that? Now, let's just focus on the one that I've circled, because this has how many subtopics? Magnets to spin a disk, how electromagnets work, how battery-powered motors work. Everybody got it? Now, in the next slide, what's going to happen is this is going to move to the top. These 3 will now become the next level, and we get to add another level. And I did it in color so you can see how it works. So there we go. There's our, was up at the top. There's our 3 subtopics. And now, under using magnets to spin a disk, we've got imagine a spinning rotor, make a rotor spin, reverse the magnet, know when to reverse the motor. So that's what you can do when your information is too much to fit into one big topic web. The last thing I'm going to show you are a couple examples of how creative teachers can get with this stuff. I call these examples classroom size. So this is a whole bulletin board in a social studies middle school. They were learning different civilizations. I've typed this in so you can see what's on here. So basically these categories remain the same: geography, culture, people, technology. And then as they move from one ancient civilization to the next, They build out the specifics about that geography or that culture or those people. So this is a board that was constantly changing. This is an example of a bulletin board. This is an ELA class, and throughout the year, they were going to be dealing with these 3 different kinds of genres. Then you can see under prose, they've got fiction, nonfiction. Under nonfiction, informational, true story, biography. And over here we have fantasy, realistic. What do you think got added here? What do you think? I know you can't see it, but what are those? Those are the names of the actual short stories or novels or whatever it was that they were reading all year. So this is like built over the course of the year. This one, this is from Monadnock High School in New Hampshire. This is middle school, huge middle school, and 3 social studies teachers are all teaching the same subject. They all got together, created this top-down web, and the chapter or the topic was the Byzantine East and the Crusades, right? They created the web, agreed on what the topics would be, and then they went to Staples, blew them up into posters, and every history classroom had the same poster. This is 3-dimensional. I love this one. And this is partially scaffolded. So yes, they did it on a hanger and made it a mobile, but you could also just as easily do this on paper. So what the teacher did was at the end of the unit, they were learning about Earth's changing surface. And they've got gravity, running water, glaciers. And the teacher gave the kids the topics. And the kids had to cut them out and decide how they related to one another. It was the laying them out and the placement. So they had the topics, they just had to figure out what were the connections. You can use topic webs, as I said before, during and after. They're really helpful to organize writing. A couple of more suggestions for scaffolding. And this first one is something that I recommend for any of these strategies. Have the student start practicing the strategy by using everyday information. So what do I mean by that? Ask your kids to create a top-down web that represents how they organize their friends on Instagram, right? Or all their different video games. How are they organized? How does your mom organize stuff in the closets in the kitchen, right? How is your favorite sports store? How do they organize the equipment? Because this way the kids are working on learning the strategy and they're not bogged down with information they don't know, rather than trying to teach them how to make a web and at the same time using it with information that's new to them. So that's a great scaffold. Another one, and I gave you an example of it, is give them partially completed webs. So they are filling in some of it. A scaffold on top of that is if you give them a partially completed web, give them a bank of the topics, kind of like the teacher that had them do the mobile, so that they've got the topics, they've just got to figure out where they belong. It's still making them make connections and develop a correct schema. The other thing is scaffold the text. So I scaffolded that text for you, and if I had said make your own web, or if I had given you the web with all the circles and boxes empty, the fact that I scaffolded the text would also help you as well. And then finally, don't forget about this one, because I know it's been a long time, but the National Reading Panel found this, and studies over and over and over again find this, that when kids are learning comprehension strategies and or when they're learning vocabulary, if they can practice those strategies and do activities with that vocabulary in small collaborative groups with their peers, they will learn them faster. It's why I said to you, you can work with a partner. Those of you who, I know you guys were talking, right? Wasn't it helpful to talk about it with somebody else? Okay. So those are some of the scaffolds. And here's a few more examples. Partially completed. This is one from algebra. This is one you can see. This, all the teacher did was give the main idea of the 3 paragraphs. Students had to fill in the next level. This is one where the teacher gave the students the topics, the subtopics. There's 3 levels here, but the teacher made them all the same shape. So the kids had to really think this through. So they cut them up, had to decide how they were going to go on the paper. And then I love the way this one colored them to make, and put circles around this to make this stand out above the other one. All right, so I'm going to move on to 2-column notes because we got a lot to cover here. But does everybody feel confident like you could create this? Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Sometime before you leave the conference, all right, I want you to take either the whole conference or one workshop that you went to and make a topic web of it. What were all the different sessions that you went today? Do something in your real life, okay? I've had people use topic webs to map out a wedding plan. I once was doing some training in North Carolina, and I said, you can create a web of something and the teacher said her husband owned a bar, so she used a top-down web to map out all the different kinds of liquor in the bar. So you can have some fun with this. All right, let's move on, because the big picture is important, but we also need details in life. So that's where two-column comes in. What is it? I'm sure many of you have heard of two-column. How many of you have heard of Cornell note-taking? And that's actually where this comes from. Back again in the mid-'70s, I was working. One of the first classes I had was our oldest high school kids that were bridging to the local public school for science and history, because Landmark wasn't accredited at that point. And they gave me this group of 6 kids, and they said, we don't even know what to call the class, just teach them whatever they need to get by. And the very first thing we did was start to work on their organization. But when it came to processing and organizing the information, I realized they had no skills. And back then, this stuff was called study skills. And so I kind of went on a search, what's out there, and I discovered Cornell Notes, but it's designed for college students. And with the original Cornell Notes, let me just show you the model. So the way Cornell works is across the top of your page, you draw a line with enough space to write a topic. Then you draw a vertical line, not in the middle, about 1/3, 2/3. Now, in the original Cornell Notes, at the bottom of every single page of students, there's a quarter of the page, and students are supposed to immediately write a summary of what they just took notes on. This is at the college level. That was too complicated for our students. Summarizing is a much more advanced skill. It requires much more synthesis. It's harder. So we separated those out. But that's where it comes from. So I'm sure many of you have heard of that. Why do we use it? It separates the big ideas from the supporting stuff. And I'm going to use some odd terms here, right? The big stuff from the supporting stuff, because the terminology that's used in standards across stuff that we read about, people interchange words, and really depending on what you're doing notes on, whether it's read, said, or done, right? The terminology or what goes in the left side and the right side might vary. It might even be pictures, okay? But the idea is you've got this line down the page, and it really separates them. It is one of the most versatile, flexible models for note-taking. You can do outlining. A lot of people love that. I have problems with it because the visual clues you get, Roman numeral to Arabic to capitals to smalls, index, it just gets totally overwhelming. When you get to the two-column notes, it's just really easy to see the difference. Let's turn, if you will, to, I think it's on page 4. And I actually have a set of two-column notes started for our sleep and napping article. So what I've given you are 4 main ideas. Where did these come from? Where did the 4 things on the left come from? The headings, they're the big topics, right? And they're coming right off the topic web. We said there were 4 big ideas. There's 4 big ideas. Now, I've started to fill in, to model for you, the details. So under each of those sections, if you remember, there were 1 or 2 paragraphs, right? 3 paragraphs. I started to fill in details, but I've left the rest blank. I don't think we're going to have time, but if I did, what I'd say to you is, why don't you try taking some of the details? But before I get into a little bit further, let's just talk again about the flexibility. So let's say I'm taking notes from listening, which is really hard to do because oftentimes you can't repeat it. You don't know what the main ideas are. I can start filling in my details even if I don't know my main ideas and then just leave this space blank, okay? The other thing is if I go like this and I cover up my detail column, now what can I use this for? Studying. One of the sub-skills when you teach kids note-taking is not only how to state topics and main ideas, but how to turn them into questions. And so if either the student or the teacher as a scaffold turns this into a question, then it helps guide the kids for what the details are. Similarly, you can cover up your big ideas, use the details, so it's an easy study tool as well. So that's why I like the format. All right, this is one of those examples. We've got some two-column note templates that you can just download from our website. It's the same URL that I showed you at the start. Why do we teach it? Well, we know that it is an essential strategy that supports comprehension. So how many of you write a list before you go to the supermarket. Okay? How many of you, when you write that list, actually organize on the list? So you put all the vegetables in one area and, okay, yeah, anal compulsive. Instead of a list, you could, by the way, do a topic web of it. How many of you, if you forget the list at home, it doesn't matter because you wrote it out and had to think about it? That's what note-taking does for our kids. A lot of times you'll see on IEPs, I know this happened with my own son. On his IEP, it said, Jay will have access to the teacher's notes. Okay? And so what do? We give them our notes, or we give them another student's notes. We are depriving them of the value of the notes. It's the generating the notes that makes the difference. So what I always say is if you've got that on an IEP, yes, maybe give the kid some notes, but at least have some blanks so the student has to think through what goes, wherever. There's a really fascinating couple of studies that have been done in the last couple of years where they looked at some college students. I'll try to summarize it really quickly. They looked at college students that were really fast typers and used their laptops to take notes versus students that had to handwrite their notes. What do you think they found? Yes, it was better. The ones who could type fast, they got a lot more into their notes, but 3 weeks later they did not remember it. Because what are they doing? They're just transcribing. They're not processing the information. Because you can't write fast enough, you have to stop, think, and say, all right, I can only write 3 words. What are the words going to be? So don't deprive your kids of the chance to generate the notes. For those of you that are in states where you're following standards, whether they're called the Common Core anymore or not, many of the states have their own, but all they did was, slap their own name on it. This is one of the first standards in reading, and it's the close reading standard. Read closely to determine what the text says, explicitly and make logical inferences. Cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking. If you can't take notes, you're not going to be able to do that. And then several of the writing standards are devoted to writing from sources as well. But this one in particular, and these are anchor standards. They literally start in kindergarten, go all the way up to grade 12. Writing standard number 8, gather relevant information from multiple print and digital sources. And if you don't know how to take notes, you're not going to be able to do it. Okay. Oh, I think I already talked about this, but do you see how visually it lays it out better? All right. Also, some people use a T-chart where the line is down the middle. Please don't call it 2-column notes. T-charts are not the same. T-charts are often used for comparing and contrasting, right? Don't get your kids confused. You can use this, but just say that's not the same. In 2-column notes, we have big ideas on the left side, details on the right. Also, don't commit a suicide. What do I mean by that? Many of these skills or strategies are actually a collection of a whole bunch of sub-skills that need to be in place in order to do it, right? And so teaching kids to draw the lines, that's really easy. And you can tell them, put the main ideas here in the details. If they don't know what the difference is, if they don't know how to write concisely, look at the 2-column notes that I've started for your piece. What do you notice? Am I lifting sentences and paragraphs wholesale? No, you've got to be able to put it in your own words. You've got to write concisely. So that assumes that kids have a whole host of sub-skills, that they know how to abbreviate, although that's gotten better with texting, that they know how to paraphrase, that they know how to write concisely. How about visual clues? I see a lot of you taking notes. How many of you are starring things, putting numbers, drawing arrows, right? Drawing pictures. We assume that kids know how to do that. They don't. All of this happens at the I stage. When you're teaching kids this strategy, you've got to model the heck out of it. Model it, think it aloud, let kids create notes together to talk about what they want to put on which side. So don't commit a suicide. Now, let's make a connection to the notes. So these 3 strategies I'm sharing with you today, any one of them can be used or taught separately. So you could just do webs, you could just do 2-column notes, you could just do summarizing. But there's real power when you do 2 or more of these at the same time. That was also one of the findings of the National Reading Panel, that when we teach kids strategies in bundles, and think about it, when we use strategies, those of us who maybe weren't explicitly taught, we kind of figured them out on our own, but we don't just have one strategy. We use several. We maybe highlight, we maybe take some notes. So I want to show you how this can connect together. So if you've got a topic web, you've already got the start of the big ideas, right? They can shift over to the left side, and now what you get to do is add the details that you didn't have room for in your topic web. So here's a very simple example. Teacher started with the 5 themes of geography: location, place, interaction, movement, regions. Moves to the left side, and as they went through different places, studied different kinds of geography, the left side stayed the same, but what changed on the right? The details. So I'm going to show you a bunch of examples from anything that's read, said, or done. This is how do you conduct a science experiment. So this is not so much informational notes, but it's stages and then the details of what you need to do for that. Here's one, a process in math. So if you're going to graph a line, here are the major stages, and then what do we have over on details? On the right, we have directions, we have some examples. This is one, this was notes from a video. They were watching Christmas Carol. Students were asked to list the 3 Christmas ghosts, and as they're watching the video, take down details that you learn about each one of the ghosts. So again, anything read, said, or done. This one is a football coach. You know, it's interesting, when I do training in the South, it seems like a lot of history teachers in high school are also coaches, right? Okay, so, and we also we come back, we do follow-up, and so I was meeting with this, with the group of history teachers, and the teacher said, well, I am going to admit I haven't tried it in my class yet, but I started using the 2-column notes with my football team, and it's the greatest tool for getting them to learn the plays, because you can see how they can like fold it over and yeah. Now I don't know exactly what that means, but I love to show it because the details don't even have to be words, right? Okay, here's one, and this is partially completed. So this is 2-column notes that's used as a pre-writing tool. So you've got the stages in the lab report, right? And some hints over on the right, but the student is filling the details in. This is a music teacher in a middle school. What he explained is he would change the genres. They were learning different types of music. The left side always stayed the same. Characteristics, instruments, and then details would go on the right. And I love this one. The student added little pictures of the instruments. Here's a math one. So I think this is greatest common factor. And again, look how it can be numbers. It doesn't have to be words or explanation. This is a student. He's clearly at the You Do It stage. Looks like Jason is in grade 4. He's taking notes from chapter 5, so this is right out of a textbook. I don't know if you can read that, but the Narragansett way of life changes. He's missing the H. In the Narragansett way of life, other Native Americans in the Northeast, and he's got his details over on the right. And I believe that they were highlighting certain key vocabulary. This is a high school student taking notes from his history book, but obviously a little bit more sophisticated. So you've got before the revolution, roads and turnpikes, details over on the right. This is partially completed, so here's an example of a scaffold. Oftentimes the hardest part for the kids is the main ideas. So this teacher gave them the big topics, and they filled in the details over on the right. They also did a brief summary at the bottom. This is one where a student was taking information to do a report about whales, which is why it was explained to me. These were the main topics. It's a mammal, 3 types of species, what they look like. But what do they eat and how big, how old? You see how he's got some arrows? Because when he decided to write out his informational piece, he switched the order of the topics. Now, let's get into narrative, because narrative, same thing with the webs, right? Depending on what your focus is for your literature, that's how you're going to use your notes. So those of you who teach literature, you know you might focus on characters or setting or plot development or theme. So in this case, the teacher is focusing on just having the kids learn about the characters. So I don't know if you can see this. Obviously, the story was called Bad Boy. There's 6 characters. So the characters are on the left. And as they learn more about the characters, the students are adding details over on the right. Now this one, though, is a much more sophisticated focus for the 2-column notes. I mean, this is pretty low-level Bloom's, right? Understanding, remembering. But over here, they were in high school. They were reading the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. They were focusing on the theme of race. And the students were asked to list the main characters on the left side. And then, as the story develops, jot down details that would give you insight in how that character was dealing with the theme of race. So this is much more, requires more synthesis, etc. Once again, I thought I'd bring in some really early grades for you. So here you've got 2 main characters. Grade 1, Fern, Templeton, students drawing, adding details. Templeton's dirty, he's mean, he loves the dump, he's a boy, he found words. He has a long tail, he's fat. And this one, I love this one. This is a kindergarten example. First, next, then last. They were learning about recycling. And so I want you to see how you can use, the kids are using the visuals as well. And this one I love because this student decided to add another last. So his first last was the bottles are cut up into small bits. And then he added another one, then someone will use it to make something. So you can introduce this in some of the earliest grades. Here's another example. This is actually reusable. So let's say you're teaching young kids about character development. So on the left, what are some of the things that classics around character development? What was the character's, describe the character, what was his feelings, what were his actions, his thoughts? And so if the kids aren't able to read these words, the visuals give them the clue for the big idea, and then over on the right they can add the details using words or using pictures. That they can have a class discussion, the teacher can write it out over on the side. So, what do you think? You got a sense of how 2-column works? If the alarm went off, we'd go back and we'd start. I really had an alarm go off. That's why I'm saying this. I had that one time. So let's take a moment. I know I don't have time for you to actually take the notes, but let's look closely at the sample for the sleep and napping. And look at the example, the first couple, and can you see how the main ideas that you pulled out in your topic web could help guide you and add details in the right column? Okay. Did anybody here go to Becky Felton and Vicki Norris's session yesterday? Do you notice they had a top-down web and 2-column notes for you to take notes on? I created the web and the notes for them. They love this stuff. And you can bring this, if you don't work with kids, you work with adults. Have the adults do this. These are good strategies for anybody. In fact, I'm not going to do this, I promise, but if I said to you that you can't leave this room unless you give me an oral or verbal an oral or written summary of what you learned in this 90 minutes, how many you'd be scooting out right now, right? Because it's hard. But guess what? You will remember it much more if you do something written. So, do I have any questions about 2-column notes before I move to summarizing? Yes?
I'm trying to instruct that when they do the 2-column loan, and I agree with you that they have to write the notes in the class, then they go back to the computer and they type them to rephrase and add larger vocabulary words.
That's even better.
So my question to you is there so they don't have to make it?
Yep.
Is there a PDF Coronel method?
For writing on a computer. Here's what you use. You use the table feature in Microsoft Word. I think, so what she's asking is, if you're going to have kids take notes by typing, how do you get this format? So you go to table. Do you know what a table is? And you say, give me 2 columns, and then you can have tons of rows, right? And what happens is, do you know what happens? It comes up, and you got two, and then you just take the line in the middle, drag it a little to the left, so you got 1/3. And what happens is, in the left box, you type in your main idea. Over on the right, you can start typing your details. And what does the technology do? It makes the box as bigger. As more you write, the more of the box goes. And when it's time to switch to another main idea, you go to the next box. Then you write your details on the right. So yeah. But what I was going to say is, what you were getting at is something that we call note making. So note-taking is what we've been doing here, right? Having the kids go through that processing, get it down on paper. And like I said, if you forget your grocery list, just the fact that you wrote it, it helps, right? But let's say it's a week later and you've got to really remember what's on the list. Maybe there's a lot of information. Now you want to have that list. Aren't you going to go back in and study it or maybe reorganize it or do something? That's what eventually when kids, after they've taken some notes, they might need those notes to write a prompt, a written response. They might need those notes to study, right? They might need those notes to start generating questions. And that's what we call note making. That's where you go back in and you revise your notes. And that's what you're doing. You're saying to them, you know, get it down, but then go through it a second time and process it a second time.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like in the IEP world or in the education world, we forget about that piece.
Oh, absolutely.
We're all taking notes.
Yeah.
No one's doing anything with those notes.
Yeah. So let me also say something about these three things. The fourth one I knew I wasn't going to have time to do, but the fourth one is question generation. And that's where you teach kids to generate a question at every level of thinking. We use Bloom's taxonomy. You could use Webb's DOK. But think about Bloom's, right? How many of you remember that from college? Bloom's is an amazing thing. Benjamin Bloom in the 50s, really, it is a pretty awesome model, right? And basically, it allows us to recognize that when we think, we do think at different levels, and we need all of those levels. You know, there's a big push. We want it to be rigorous. We want critical thinking. Well, critical thinking means application, analyzing, synthesis, creating. But you can't do those levels of thinking if you don't remember and understand, right? And so we can teach kids to create questions about something they've just read, said, or done, right? And if they can frame a question that makes you think at the remembering level, the understanding level, the synthesis level, right? It means they have to really think. They don't even have to answer the questions, I guess is what I'm saying. It's the act of generating the questions that supports the comprehension. And that was another one of the major National Reading Panel findings, that when we have kids not only answer, but generate their own questions, it really helps them. All right, so where am I going with this? If you take the four things, the web, the notes, the summary, and the question generation, the first two, the web and the notes, those are lower level thinking. It's mostly remembering, processing information, putting it back out in your own words. It's not till you have to summarize and then do question generation that it really pushes you to think at the upper levels. And here's what we find happens. When we do training for teachers in schools around this, right? And we go back and it's not just a one-day learn what you can, but it's like we're really going to try to do this across the building. When we go back, what we find is that most of the teachers will do at least one of the four. Which is the one they go to first, do you think? Nope. Nope. 2 column notes, because it's easy. Here, kids, draw the line. Big ideas here, details on the right. So that they do that. Then they go to Webb's. So many of them will do at least once, right? But not very many will do all four. And I really wish we could get them to do the summarizing and the question generation, because that's where you really are teaching the deep critical thinking. But it's hard to teach and it's hard to do. I forget what the question was, but I'm going to move on. All right, so let's end with a piece. Oh, I just want to show you scaffolding. So have them start taking notes about things they're familiar with. In this case, the teacher, 5th grade teacher, had the kids write the 4 seasons, jot down details so they could practice the writing concisely and the wording about something they understood. Another is partially completed. So here you see an example. The teacher's got space for 3 big topics. Some, it's almost like a closed procedure. Again, if you wanted to scaffold this even more, you could have a word or a phrase bank over on the right. Here's another example where it's partially completed. Another, the teacher has actually flipped these into questions to help the kids figure out the main ideas. Using pictures, this is actually from a school that has like 85% of their kids are English as a second language. And so the teacher always tries to add visuals into the 2 column notes. All right, how else can you use them? For lectures, you can take notes for lectures. You can use them to gather information from research. You can also use them to help kids learn vocabulary. So on the left, there, that's our big idea, right? The word is congruent. And this comes from our key vocabulary routine. But what's in print is standard in the format, and then the students add all the details about the word. There's another example. So you can find lots of purposes for it. What I want to do now is shift to summarizing our last in the trilogy today. And I've got a little sponge to model. I love presenting at these conferences, and I love presenting at schools for students with learning disabilities because I feel like I'm preaching to the choir and you get it. So when I say multisensory, you know what I mean. But it's much harder, when you're dealing with public school teachers. So if this seems redundant to you, I apologize. But what I learned, and what any of us who learn to work with lots of kids who struggle with reading and writing, is that you have to break it down, micro-unit it, I call it, or task analyze it, pieces at a time, that you have to be as multisensory as possible, and you have to bring in things that will be memorable for them to connect, right? So what I found was the concept of summary is really hard for kids to get. It's actually hard for teachers to get. They mix it up. Does anybody know, what would you say is the difference between a retell and a summary? Anybody? Yes?
Retell includes most of the details in sequential order, and
Okay.
summary might just be a couple of main ideas.
Yep. Key word is the details, okay? So they both are in the student's words, right? And they're both coming from whatever the text or whatever's read, said, and done. The difference is a retell is, can you remember everything? The big ideas and the details. And even if you can't distinguish them, it doesn't matter because you're just going to put it all out there. Very low-level thinking, right? That's why, by the way, the third standard in the 10 reading standards in the Common Core is about main ideas and summarizing. But kids developmentally aren't expected to summarize until the end of third grade. And so in the earliest years, you'll see the words retell and recount. Now, it doesn't mean that younger kids can't start to learn to summarize, but it's a harder level skill. It's synthesis. So I want you to imagine that this sponge, and I have a bucket of water here, right? And I just dipped the sponge into it, and so it's heavy with water, right? This represents whatever I'm going to summarize. And it doesn't have to be summarizing reading. So I'm going to use an everyday example. My 91-year-old mom lives with me, and she's a hoot. She just bought a brand new car a year and a half ago. That's how sure she is that she's going to have a long life. But at her age, she does have a few minor ailments. So there are 3 biggies for her. She has macular degeneration she's starting to get. She also has to watch her cholesterol and her high blood pressure. Now, I have 2 younger brothers, and being the girl and the oldest in the family, I, of course, am expected to take care of everything and just report to them. So every time we go to the doctor's office, I have to call my brothers and give them an update. Now, so let's imagine this isn't a book or a chapter or a movie. This is like just mom going to the doctor. So when I'm there, we're there for maybe 20 minutes, a half hour, lots of information, lots of details. But what are the 3 big ideas? Remember what they are? Eyes, blood pressure. Okay. So this represents everything that I learned while I'm in the doctor's office. I actually now, because I'm getting older, start taking notes, but that's another story. Okay. So if I was going to give a retell to my brothers of everything, I would just give them the whole sponge. Catch this. Ready? Okay. Thank you. I'd give them everything, all the water in the sponge, everything. But that's not the goal here. They'd hang up on me. So instead, what do? I have to think or process all the information. I have to do a bunch of cognitive strategies. I have to say, well, what were the 3 big? Did the doctor cover all 3? What were the results on the 3? How is her macular degeneration, et cetera? And what are the details around it? So what do? You think about it. That's like manipulating the sponge. So what do you think is happening to the water as I'm doing this? Where's the water going? It's squeezing out. I go like this, right? And that's what I have to do. I got to get it down to just like bare bones. Okay. So now I get it down to just my main ideas because that's all a summary should be. However, you need a little bit of detail. Like, I can't just say to my brothers, eyes, good, blood pressure, bad, right? I have to give a little bit more, right? So that's where we say, okay, now when I let go, and now this is the form I'm going to give you again, right? Okay, it's lighter because there's no water in it. But what if I only gave my brothers 2 of the items? I'm missing 1/3 of my sponge, right? Or if I start giving too much detail, I could say, get rid of some of the moisture, squeeze it out a little. Or if there's not enough detail in there. I could say make it a little more moist. Does that make sense? So now it's like I blow it back up, and if I'm doing this verbally or I'm doing it in writing, I'm literally creating full sentences. So one of my sentences might go something like this. Mom's macular degeneration has stabilized and her sight numbers are the same as they were last time. So did I give a little detail? Did I give all the details? I didn't give them the actual numbers. So it's a really helpful metaphor. We have watched kids in public school using this. Teachers will have kids put little sponges on the corners of their desks, sometimes use water to start, right? Eventually get rid of the water, eventually get rid of the sponge, but the kids remember the metaphor. By the way, remember I mentioned to you we've got a bunch of YouTube videos. One of those videos is me demonstrating this. It's about 10 minutes with real water. So if you like the concept, you want to show it to your kids or other teachers, just go to the website and you can access it there. Okay. Whoops. So, why teach it? Summarizing has been identified as one of the most effective comprehension strategies. By the way, it also turns out to be one of the most effective writing strategies. So Stephen Graham and his colleagues did a piece called Writing Next. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but they did a meta-analysis of all the research on what works to improve the writing of kids beyond grade 3. And they ended up with 11 items, and summarizing comes in, I think, at number 4 or 5. So it's really effective, but it is hard to do. I mentioned to you, actually I called it Standard 3. It's really Standard 2. Standard 2. Determine central ideas or themes of a text, analyze their development, summarize. We have a standard devoted just to that. Now, what can you summarize? Because this is really interesting. A lot of times when people think of summarizing, they think about it as this really complex task. Oh, I've got to summarize the story. I've got to summarize the chapter. You don't. You can summarize anything. I've seen this PE teacher who the last 3 minutes of every PE class, the kids turn, look at each other, summarize 2 things that they did verbally in PE that day. So it doesn't have to be this long, arduous written task. Obviously, you can and should summarize text, but you can summarize an experiment that was done in class, a process, an event, summarize the food fight that happened in the cafeteria. There's a principal I know where they're using keys across the building, and the protocol now when kids get sent to the principal's offices, they have to first generate a set of 2-column notes about what happened, and then orally explain to the principal, summarize, why are you in my office? They then use it to write up a summary that gets sent home to their parents. A video, a lecture, a discussion. So you can summarize anything. A couple of scaffolds. How to write a summary. This is a set of how-to steps. Those of us who summarize naturally, we go through all this in our heads, but we just don't have to think about it. So this is a kind of scaffold you can give kids. In a minute, I'm going to show you a summary template that actually walks kids through each of this, and I believe I gave it to you in your packets. And this is a quick little way to remember the steps in writing a summary. Missed. First, you have to know what the main ideas are. List them. Mom's eyes, mom's, right? Then, introductory sentence. You have to tell the person what you're summarizing. Next, develop your sentences based on the main ideas. Are you going to make it a little moist? Absolutely. Finally, add your transitions. So let me show you what... we got the transition list. I told you where you could download that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about scaffolds. If I have a top-down web, so let's say I made a topic web while I was in the doctor's office, isn't that going to help me create my summary? Absolutely. And if I have 2-column notes, I'm going to be able to use especially the left side. If I have nothing, I could just write a list of the main ideas. And finally, we can use the summary template. So here's an example where the students were writing a summary of a chapter in, Lord of the Flies. So you can see the student wrote 4 things that happened. That's his main events. And then he developed it in, you see the transitions? Here's the summary template that I told you about. Do you have it in your handouts? Okay, great. So it has space for the students to do each one of these. And you'll notice, anytime I give a writing template, I include suggested transitions right on the template. Now I'm going to show you an example of how a topic web was used to work its way into a summary. And to a certain degree, it's a little formulaic, okay? Now, the students were reading To Kill a Mockingbird. The focus was on Atticus Finch's courage, and they had to summarize some examples of how Atticus showed courage. So let's look at the web. What are the 3 examples? Defended Tom Robinson, he shot a rabid dog, and he faced down a lynch mob. Those are the 3 ways that he showed courage. So that's like bare bones. Now, I used some color here so you can see how this moves into the summary. What's our first sentence? It tells us what we're summarizing, right? How Atticus Finch showed courage. You see it in blue? Do you remember the 3 yellow circles? There they are. Defends Robinson, shoots the dog, mob. But what was added? What's all the black words? Well, the bold blacks are transitions, but we don't just say killed a rabid dog. We develop it into a sentence. So we bring in a little bit of detail, right? Right? He was willing to face criticism and threats of violence to defend Tom Robinson, a black man who was... So a little bit of detail, but we're not telling everything that happened in the novel. Here you can see this is a 5th grade student following this model. So the students were given... they had to pick a patriot. This one chose Patrick Henry. Identify 3 major topics. This one was jobs, achievements, pastimes. And then fill in some subtopics. But then they were asked to summarize and not include all the details. So I don't know if you can see, but you see the student put a couple check marks here? What is he checking off? That's the moisture he's going to bring in, but he's not going to tell you everything about Patrick Henry. And I want you to look how he's following blue, red, and so there's his summary, and he's bringing over the color. There's his topic sentence. It's about Patrick Henry. There are the 3 red topics, right? The green that he decided to include, and then what has he done with his transitions? He's circled them. I'll show you another example using 2 column notes. So this, what's the topic? All right, I made it green. What are the 3 main ideas? Tension builds, colonists rebel, war on the horizon. It's in red. We got a lot of details. If you write about everything on the right side, it's not a summary, it's a retell. So we're going to definitely include all 3 things on the left, but we're only going to bring in a little bit of detail. And so in the next slide, you see how it all comes together. So there's our topic letting us know what we're summarizing. There's the 3 items from the left. The blue comes from blowing them up a little bit, and then the bold black is the transitions. So I wanted to show you how you can introduce this in the earliest grades. This is a kindergarten. They were learning about, actually it was decodable text. And the teacher is doing the writing, but the kids are explaining what they want to do. So there you've got your 2 column notes, setting, characters, events. Kids are drawing pictures for that. And then here's your summary. Sig the Pick is at the fair. That's your setting. This is just settings. And then look how they've highlighted the transition. So you can do this in the youngest grades. And we're not going to have time to do this, but why don't you just take out the last page in that packet? Because what I've done for you is, instead of asking you to create a summary, I decided to use this final activity as a way to show you some ways that you can scaffold summarizing for kids. So if you turn to page 5, you'll see what I've done is written a summary, but it's not a very good summary. First thing you'll notice is it's missing its introductory sentence. Do you see the lines? So this is the part where you tell us what we're summarizing. What are we summarizing? We're summarizing about sleep and how napping can support sleep. So if I wanted my students to start to practice some of the sub-skills of summarizing, I could give them something like this and say, practice writing the introductory sentences. The other thing that I'm modeling here is, so I've got a bunch of sentences, but it doesn't flow very well. There are no transitions. There are some instances where we could combine sentences and make it, and so you'll notice I've given you lots of space. So if we had time, what I'd say to you is work with a partner and talk through this summary and make it better. Add the transitions. Make connections between the sentences. So this is the kind of thing that these are when you do sub-skills that eventually lead. You don't just say to kids, I've told you what a summary is, now go and do it. That's peeing in the classroom. What do I mean by that? And we don't want to do that. We don't want to do this. Okay, we don't. So what does that stand for? P stands for you present the skill or the strategy. Here's 2 column notes, or here's what a summary is. You're going to tell us what you're summarizing. You're going to grab the main ideas. Then you're going to write them out, use transitions. So I presented it, I explained it, and now I expect you to do it. Go home and do it for homework, right? Here's 2 column notes. Draw your line, put the big ideas on the left, details on the right. Has everybody got it? Great, go home and start using it. It's the complete opposite of I, we, you. So we went through these strategies, big picture. I showed you a lot of classroom examples. The way I want to end this is to remind you, use your multisensory teaching, scaffold the heck out of this stuff, differentiate your learning, right? I love this I, we, you slide. And don't commit a suicide about the underlining skills. Thank you all very much. I have to do the, did you collect the, all right. We still have 2 minutes, so she's going to collect your slips. If you could just bring them down to the end to make it easy. Everybody got them? She got them? Okay. So, okay. Anybody have one? All right. So I'm going to pull 3 names, and the order that I pull them is the first one gets to choose their book, and we'll go from there. I also put out a bunch of order forms with 20% off, so if you want to purchase books, just do it within the next month. All right, let's see. Who do we got? Miranda Foreman. Miranda Foreman, come on up. Okay. Put this back in here. You're welcome. Susan Talley. Come on up, Susan. Last one. Nancy Marinson. Yes. Thank you, everybody.